The second panel this morning is also dedicated to the question of unity. It's called the Unity Conversation Panel. And I would like to come into conversation with my fellow panelists here. And I would be happy if those who are still outside will come in so that we can start with our panel. We will start now our second panel. Dear conference participants, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, after having heard three excellent keynote lectures by Susan Wood, Metropolitan Job, and I have now the honor to moderate the second panel entitled Living Visible Unity. I'm pleased to welcome 5 representatives of different Christian denominations, which will help us to broaden our perspectives on visible unity. I will introduce each of them before their first statement. My name is Johannes Oeldemann. I'm a Roman Catholic theologian working as director of an ecumenical institute sponsored by the Catholic Archdiocese of Paderborn in Germany. I specialized in Eastern Christian studies, and I'm engaged in Orthodox Catholic dialogue on various levels. Since 2023, I am one of the Roman Catholic delegates to the In the Faith and Order Commission. My initial question to all panelists is, in which way they experience unity in their denomination, and what are the most important characteristics of visible unity in their cultural context. Let's first take a look into the Asian context. Suki Pang dedicates her ministry to the living practice of Christian unity in the complex context of Hong Kong. She grounds this work in her roles as Director of Ecumenical Relations for the Hong Kong Christian Council, honorary researcher at the Divinity School in Hong Kong, and as honorary minister of the Church of Christ in China. Her ecumenical service extends globally on the WCC's Commission on Ecumenical Education and Formation, and regionally in the Program Committee of the Christian Conference of Asia. Suki, if you talk about visible unity in the Chinese context, what are your experience and how can Christian unity become visible in your social context?
Thank you so much, Johannes. Your Eminences, beloved siblings in Christ, thank you to the Faith and Order Commission for this kind invitation. To be asked to speak at this theological heart of the ecumenical movement is both a profound honor and a weighty responsibility. My own church, the Church of Christ in China, is itself a living testament to the very hope that fuels the work of the Faith and Order. Born from the ecumenical vision, our church was founded in the same year as the First World Conference in 1927. It is therefore a particular privilege to be here in this place as we commemorate the Council of Nicaea. We rightly revere this movement in our shared history. It stands as the first great symbol of the Church's conciliar mind, a spirit-guided event that gave us the very grammar of our Trinitarian faith. We remember it rightly as a triumph of unity. And yet, in our reference for the Creed, I feel we have developed a kind of collective amnesia. We have polished the monument of Nicaea so thoroughly that we have forgotten the raw contest and profoundly human material from which it was carved. Our handbooks tell an abridged version of the story, a heroic Athanasius against the heretic Arius. But this is a later simplified narrative. The real story is far more complex and for us far more instructive. Recent scholarship like the work of Professor Dr. Volker Draco from Tübingen has shown us the story of Nicaea does not begin with Arius. It begins decades earlier in the theological crucibles of the East, like the Synod of Antioch in 268. There, the two great streams of the thought were already in tension, one stressing the Logos as essentially to the Father, but the other stressing the Logos as established by the Father's sovereign will. What happened in Nicaea then was not a final chapter, but a single politically charged scene in a much longer drama. The central conflict was not even Arius, but the giants who represented these two streams, Eustathius and Eusebius. It was their irreducible difference that the empire Constantine brought to communion. The result was a costly, fragile consensus. The insertion of the non-biblical homoousios was a daring, difficult step to bridge a seemingly unbridgeable gap. And it was not an easy consensus, but a communion forged in the fire of real conflicts. I propose then that we see Nicaea not as a monument to uniformity, but as a powerful symbol of the church wrestling with irreducible difference. It is in that messy, spirit-led, contested process, not only the clean final product itself, that we find our starting point for conversation today. This richer memory of Nicaea forces us to re-examine our own ecumenical models. The dominant paradigm has been unity in diversity, which has been foundational in allowing us to move beyond logics of exclusion. From our experience in Asia, I've come to believe that this model, for all its value, comes with an inherent limitation, with what I call the domestication of otherness. We must distinguish between diversity and otherness. Diversity is difference within a shared system. The variety of instruments in an orchestra playing different parts of a common score, which can be managed, harmonized, reconciled. Otherness, however, is different. Otherness is the arrival of a new instrument with its own music, challenging even the composition itself. It's a irreducible, often unsettling exteriority of another. The ecumenical movement has become adept at managing diversity, but we have yet to learn to fully grapple with the challenge of encountering the other as other. In East Asia, we are oriented toward harmony, but true harmony is not the silencing of dissonance. It's the dynamic interplay of different notes. It respects genuine otherness. This is not a philosophical preference, but a missiological necessity. For Christians in Asia who often live as minorities, our witness is made credible not when we show that we have integrated our diversities, but when we show that we can love and be communion with those who remain truly, irreducibly other to us. This pursuit of a communion holding otherness is the living history of my own church, the Church of Christ in China. To understand the history of the church is to understand a century-long experiment with what we might call ecclesial decolonization. Our forebears voiced a holy impatience with the sectarian baggage of the West. The 2022 National Christian Conference in Shanghai declared boldly that the Western denominational labels were a source of confusion, bewilderment, and inefficiency on Chinese soil. When the Church of Christ in China was formally inaugurated in 1927, it was an organic union. The Chinese leaders deliberately rejected the word united because this was not a merger of Western franchises, but the birth of a Chinese church in its own right. The genius lay in the radical respect for the otherness of each tradition joining the church. The foundational doctrinal bond of union created constitutional space to allow its constituent churches to retain their original standards of faith. This was not a pragmatic compromise, but a positive theological vision that refused to violate the integrity of the other by melting it down into a new uniform whole. It chose communion with otherness, not unity over it. This was a profound act of faith. This lived experience, I believe, offers a vital complementary corrective to the dominant ecumenical paradigm. Much of the Western ecumenical thought begins with what I would call an ontology of unity. It starts with the abstract premise that the church is one, and our task is to overcome historical divisions to restore the metaphysical reality of oneness. This leads to an ecumenism in time, as we heard earlier, a historical theological project that seeks to prove our essential oneness before we can truly act as one. The Asian experience, however, suggests a very different starting point. Our first philosophy must be ethics, not ontology. We have for too long practiced an ecumenism of the same, one that seeks to grasp and comprehend all difference and diversity with the totalizing, imagined concept of unity, presupposing that this one unity essentially exists and is merely waiting to be restored. But the Asian witness calls us to an ecumenism of the other, one that begins not with a concept, but with an encounter with the face of the other tradition in its vulnerability, its unique history, and its irreducible witness to Christ on their soil. This face cannot be totalized, assimilated. It does not invite comprehension, but issues an ethical command. As the prior ethical summons that moves us from the question of being, what is the essential nature of our unity, to the primary relational question of response, how shall we live together as followers of Christ for the sake of the world? This then is the ethics of unity, an ethics of koinonia, a communion not achieved by hoping to restore a single church self, but practiced in the infinite holy demand of our proximity. This ethical approach insists that the church spiritual unity must be made tangible and credible through our actions. Unity is not a statement to be recovered, but a discipline to be practiced in the face of the other. Long before the Church of Christ of China was formally inaugurated, its future members were already living this ethic, cooperating in Bible translation, founding union universities, creating the hymns of universal praise with churches far beyond their own boundaries. This is unity made audible, not in doctrinal negotiation, but in common doxology. This is acting as one in order that we might become one. From the shores of Asia, we offer this testimony not as a regional curiosity, but a theological challenge. The story of the Church of Christ in China suggests that unity is possible, not as a return to an imagined past, but as a forward movement into a future where the irreducible other is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be held in common. I conclude by returning to Nicaea and to the heart of the Trinitarian faith is sought to articulate. Let us move beyond the paradigm that mistakes the management of diversity for the embrace of otherness. Let us seek the truly perichoretic Catholicity constituted by the triune otherness, not achieved in spite of their distinctions. Let us be called to this dance like the triune God, a living, breathing harmony that reflects the eternal life of God. This perhaps, I suggest, from our experience, is the most authentic creed we can offer to a fractured and waiting world. Thank you.
Thank you, Suu Kyi, for highlighting the importance of respecting otherness, and that in the Asian context, not ontology is the starting point for reflecting about the unity, but ethics. We now move to the Orthodox perspective. Athanasios Despotis brings this to this panel. Professor Despotis comes from Greece, but teaches New Testament at the University of Bonn in Germany. His academic work focuses on the intersection of biblical exegesis, early Christian thought, and ancient philosophy, with a particular interest in how Orthodox hermeneutics can engage contemporary theological dialogue. He also serves within the Greek Orthodox metropolis of Germany, where he contributes to theological education, pastoral formation, and church music. As a scholar and musician, he seeks to foster unity through both theological reflection and shared worship, embodying the integration of intellect, faith, and culture in the pursuit of Christian communion. Professor Despotis, what are the ways in which you experience unity in practice in your context, and what are the specific tools in the Eastern Orthodoxy for making unity visible?
Thank you so much. I would like firstly to express my deep gratitude for the invitation and for having me on this wonderful panel. I belong indeed to the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, and I serve both as a member and director of the choir of the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Bonn. At the same time, I teach at a Protestant theological faculty in Bonn, where I'm privileged to contribute as a Greek Orthodox theologian within a predominantly Protestant environment for almost 20 years. So in my parish life, we experience already visible unity in many practical ways. We regularly invite and are invited by brothers and sisters from other denominations to ecumenical services. And we have joint initiatives. For example, every autumn, we co-celebrate an ecumenical Vesper service on the Day of Creation, where all denominations together pray and reflect on our shared responsibility for the world. I also teach Byzantine music and have members in my choir that come from diverse denominations. Now, at the University of Bonn, we have visible unity in other ways. We have collaborations of scholars with diverse denominational backgrounds. At the present, 3 Greek Orthodox scholars work at the Protestant faculty and 2 at the Roman Catholic faculty, where we offer teaching and research from Greek Orthodox perspective. We also undertake joint academic initiatives. In Bonn, we have the Ecumenical Biblical Society, where we can research and exchange ideas together on the exegesis of Scripture, but we also research together our common heritage. And our common heritage is not only the Septuagint and the New Testament, but also the patristic interpretation of the first 5 centuries. And by researching this shared heritage, we have to go, and we go back to ancient Greek philosophy, because almost all early Christian authors were philosophically educated. And thus, we recognize the ecumenical significance not only of the Scripture or the Fathers, but also of ancient Greek philosophy. Would you like me also to reflect what is more effective in our German context? So, as Greek Orthodox believers in Germany, we recognize as the climax of visible unity the Eucharistic communion. But so far we have these canonical regulations and doctrinal differences still exist is impossible. Despite that, for the German and Western European society, I think it is more convincing to demonstrate genuine friendship between the parishes. And this is what we conduct nowadays. And also it is very convincing for the German audience, so to say, to have joint actions, not only shared prayer, but care for the sick, the poor, the environment. This is a point where I believe we should work more together. Another important aspect for the German and Western European context is to work on joint declarations. And due to the work of the ACK, the German Council of Christian Churches, we are at a very good point, because we have produced an impressive body of such declarations. And last but not least, I would like to deliver a statement why I'm working on this visible unity and why I yearn for that. I believe that love and unity are the identity markers of genuine Christ believers. And I always recall first Jesus' action of washing the feet of all his believers, including Peter who later denied him, and included also Judas, who betrayed him. I recall also Jesus' prayer that his disciples may be perfected or accomplished in one. And I would like to stress here that this very important text, John 70:23, that is very often quoted in our ecumenical discourses, does not speak about perfect unity, but that disciples may be accomplished or perfected in one. That practically means that disciples first have to undergo the path of perfection by remaining in Christ, bearing fruits of love, and after that to experience the oneness of God. Therefore, I yearn for visible unity because I think it is a foretaste of eternity, and it is also the goal of our life, to return to the one God. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Despotis, for sharing your experiences on the parish as well as the academic levels, and for underlining that unity and love are the identity markers for Christians. The third perspective will be presented now by Manu Emmanuel from Sri Lanka. She serves as senior lecturer and head of academic advancement at Colombo Theological Seminary. She completed her bachelor and master's at London Bible College and her PhD in peace studies at the Asia Graduate School of Theology in the Philippines. Manu comes from an Anglican background and now serves as a lay preacher in the Methodist Church. The seminary in which she teaches systematic theology, Bible and applied theology is evangelical, multi-ethnic, and interdenominational, drawing students from traditional churches as well as from numerous newer Pentecostal and charismatic communities growing rapidly in Sri Lanka. Manu, when you talk about unity from an evangelical perspective, what is your specific approach to ecumenism, and why do you personally yearn for visible unity?
Thank you very much. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, it's a great honor to be part of this panel and to address you all. My father was Catholic, my mother was Anglican. I worship in the Methodist Church. I teach in an interdenominational seminary. So I have tried to do my part for visible unity. My context is of a very divided society. Sri Lanka, if you have heard of it in the news, in the past decade, it was known for its 30-year civil war or ethnic conflict. And so one of the signs of visible unity in that context is that the church is the only religious community that brings together people from all ethnic groups. Whereas Buddhist and Hindu communities, the Muslim community draw from one ethnic group, the church is able to show the power of the gospel to unite people who are natural enemies. At the moment, the Methodist Church is broadly evangelical, so we've experienced unity in our doctrinal basis of the Nicene Creed. We also have a lot of lay participation and representation at an annual conference every year. Ministers in the churches of the traditional churches, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Anglican, are all trained in one theological college and are also all trained to be trilingual, which again is a huge witness to a divided community. The church, the Methodist Church and other churches as well, are known for reconciliation efforts within the community, having participated in peace talks, having approached even terrorist groups in order to try and broker peace in the north during the time of great conflict. Within the Methodist Church, we also see unity in financial assistance to churches which are struggling, so churches in urban settings which are wealthier do support churches that are financially struggling. Churches like the Methodist Church belong to the National Christian Council, and a new initiative over the last few years is to include into the National Christian Council not just the more traditional churches, but also the new churches. As one of our previous speakers mentioned, the teenagers, the Pentecostals and Charismatics are now also represented on the National Christian Council. There are also times when the churches like the Methodist Church have helped foster unity in times of persecution. So the wider community tends to recognize more traditional churches as being less of a threat to the Buddhist community. And when there is persecution, it tends to be newer churches that are attacked. Pastors can be stoned or churches set on fire in the recent past. And at times like that, churches like the Methodist Church have been able to offer their buildings for people to congregate in and given them the protection of the traditional label, if you like. When I think of visible unity, the term visible unity, I have been a bit ambivalent about it because I know sometimes what seems to be visible unity is merely harmony. As my sisters mentioned, it's an Asian characteristic to want harmony and to sometimes stifle dissent and not deal with grievances, especially from those on the margins. And so I have wondered whether visible unity just in congregations or in meetings like this can necessarily mean the same as the shalom that we want within Christian community. But I've also seen that we can act ourselves into believing as much as we can believe ourselves into acting. And diversity in our context, the diverse denominations, are seen sometimes by non-believers as a sign of disunity. And yet, as we believe in a triune God, a God who is diversity as well as unity, we can celebrate that diversity and consider unity in diversity. Whereas the local religions, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, all tend to have a kind of uniformity, which is why we are regarded as divided. And yet we can celebrate that diversity and have unity. And the seminary where I work, I find, is one of those places where we experience that unity in diversity. So interdenominational seminaries, there are only 2 in the country and they're not very old. My seminary I work in is only 30 years old. And yet we draw students from all traditions and from many churches which are called free or independent churches who are not affiliated to any larger denomination. And part of our hidden curriculum is to enable students to experience unity. So they learn together. Sometimes they are meeting someone from a different denomination for the very first time. And so suspicion and hostility and misunderstanding can be eradicated through those meetings. We share the Lord's Supper together at the seminary. We learn from one another. We learn together. And there, I think, through acting together, we learn to believe in the unity of the church. Yes, I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mano, for sharing your perspectives from Sri Lanka, highlighting the importance of harmony, the fostering unity in times of persecution, and that the church are known for their reconciling efforts. We move forward. Coming to the African continents, we are gathered here in the north of Africa, and let us now travel mentally to the southernmost country of this magnificent continent. Teddy Sakupapa is an ordained minister in the Uniting Presbyterian Church in South Africa and current deputy moderator of WCC's Commission on Education and Ecumenical Formation. He completed his doctoral thesis on the interrelatedness between ecclesiology and ethics in ecumenical debates. Dr. Sakupapa previously taught systematic theology at the Theological College of the United Church of Zambia and is now senior lecturer in the Department of Religion and Theology at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. His research traverses the fields of ecumenical studies, systematic theology and social ethics, decoloniality, African theology, and the history of Christianity in Africa. Teddy, if you talk about visible unity from an African perspective, what are the most crucial aspects that you would like to highlight?
Thank you very much, Johannes, and I'd love to start by expressing my gratitude for this opportunity to join this conference that is focusing on a theme that has led me to think about the questions of orientation, discernment, and reflection around what unity might entail. And I think this conference provides us an opportunity to ponder how the churches might respond afresh to Christ's prayer that they may all be one amid new historical contextual realities and in the continuing shadow of coloniality, whose enduring logics still shape our theologies, identities, and ecclesial relations. So this expresses much of my own experiences, and as I respond, my response takes into account my lived experiences and the place where I think from and located. And so while churches flourish in Southern Africa, there are also many issues that keep churches divided before I talk about what keeps us united. Different understandings of ministry, the ordination of women, contested questions around human sexuality, and inequalities that mirror the fractures of our societies, political allegiances, and in some cases, theological polarization that further erode the capacity of churches to speak and act with a common voice. And to these dividing issues, Professor Jerry Pillay, WCC moderator, has added ideologies of race, ethnicity, subculture, and class as some of the fault lines in ecumenical relations. On 24th October, Zambia, the country of my birth, commemorates what is known as Independence Day. Yet what such celebrations often conceal is what many describe as the illusion of the post-colonial. To speak of this illusion is to unmask the deceptive idea that the end of political colonialism meant genuine liberation. In reality, the logics of domination, of exclusion, and epistemic control persist under new guises, shaping social imaginaries, and from my own experiences, also of theological epistemologies, especially in theological education and ecclesial practices. Thinking from South Africa, a place that has become home to me, decolonization not only unravels the continuity of colonial legacies and the ways our theologies can mask coloniality, but is also at the same time a spiritual and intellectual liberation through which faith is rooted in the dignity, the memory, and the imagination of all God's people. And as Dr. Turner reminded us yesterday, and Professor Gray intimated upon, coloniality is not a closed chapter of history, but an ongoing reality whose structures and violence continue to shape our ways, from my experience, not only of knowing, but of believing and of belonging. Coloniality, therefore, does challenge visible unity through the dominance of certain theological languages and the marginalization of some expressions of faith. However, the story of visible unity in Southern Africa is not only one of crisis, it is also one of opportunity. And this thematic focus of our plenary, Living Visible Unity, shifts attention, I think, from discernment to embodiment. And again, something we were challenged earlier by Professor Gray. And so I would like to briefly draw on the Belhar Confession, which came out from some of our colleagues at the University of the Western Cape, where I'm privileged to serve. The Belhar Confession reminds us that unity is both a gift and an obligation for the Church of Jesus Christ. Our confession of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church compels us towards reconciliation, justice, and mutual love. And to confess one church today is to live that unity courageously, visibly, and faithfully for the sake of the gospel and the world that God so loves. The Belhar Confession invites us to embrace unity that refuses to separate faith from solidarity or worship from witness. In today's shifting global landscape marked by wars, displacement, ecological crisis, and economic inequality, the question before us, I think, is both spiritual and practical. How shall we embody with humility and courage a unity that reflects the very being of God and bears witness to the hope of the gospel? Since the WCC's 10th Assembly in Busan, the ecumenical movement has sought to reimagine itself through the pilgrimage of justice, spirituality of journeying together. I think that from where I'm located and think from that shift resonates very deeply with mission from the margins as framed in the ecumenical affirmation on mission together towards life. It calls the church to see, listen, and discern from the edges of our societies, where God's Spirit is often, I dare say, most powerfully at work. The lived faith of those at the margins, women, young people, indigenous communities, migrants, refugees, and persons with disabilities, and those living under systems of racial and economic injustice is reframing the vision of unity itself and their stories. Unity, in my context, is less about structure and more about shared discipleship. It is at the grassroots, in congregations, in communities, and joint social action that ecumenism is most tangibly lived. Ecumenism emerges through collaboration in the struggle for dignity and justice. And as the Zambian Bemba proverb reminds us, Twende babiri temwenso, let's go together. Alone you cannot go far. This wisdom captures the heart of a pilgrimage of justice and peace while walking together across divides and acting in solidarity. And of course, there is a story of ecumenical collaboration through ecumenical structures. To bring my reflection to a close, I think that the various developments in the quest for unity in Zambia and South Africa, the places that I know best, also reveals a deeper crisis, a loss of theological imagination that risks reducing ecumenism to institutional maintenance rather than prophetic discipleship. Churches need to rediscover unity not in proximity to power, but in solidarity with the wounded of history, where the Spirit continues to renew both mission and unity. The deepest expressions of visible unity may not reside in ecclesial architecture or formal statements, but embedded in acts of hope when churches cross divides to defend, safeguard creation, and accompany the wounded of history. We gather 1700 years after Nicaea. So in my context, while Nicaea is celebrated as a touchstone of orthodoxy, its legacy is also received with ambivalence. The construction of doctrinal orthodoxy, as we all well know, often entailed the marginalization, even erasure of dissenting voices. The history surrounding Nicaea shows how theological consensus was shaped not only by debate, but by the suppression of alternative perspectives. How then might revisiting Nicaea inform our theological reflections in ways that enable prophetic resistance to new imperial visions of oikumene? For many in the global south, where empire, that enduring system of domination that orders life through the control of land, knowledge, and bodies, still shapes reality. And the question is how the legacy of Nicaea can be received without reducing it to a memory of empire, of entanglement with power. And as Susan Derber rightly reminds us, a Nicene faith is not one that cedes to empire, monarchy, domination systems, but one that subverts and transforms them. Finally, to rehear Nicaea in this Kairos moment is not merely linguistic or doctrinal, but one of translation. Receiving it as a living confession, a faith-seeking embodiment in new tongues and contexts. To embody Nicaea today is to live the creed not as memory, but as mission, an invitation to confess Jesus as Lord amidst the powers that still define and divide humanity. Living visible unity then, for me, means practicing decolonial translation, allowing the apostolic faith we confess in the Nicene Creed to find fresh voice and genuine home in diverse contexts and cultures. It requires to listen deeply to one another's stories, to honor different theological languages, and to embody communion through solidarity, justice, and shared mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Tedisa Pupapa, for sharing these African perspectives with us, highlighting the importance of the Belhar Confession, that coloniality is not a closed chapter for Africans, and that unity means especially shared discipleship. We go to our last speaker, my dear colleague in the Faith and Order Commission, Charlotte Methuen, who has worked tirelessly over the last two nights to incorporate all the proposed amendments into the draft message. Thank you for being now with us here on this panel. Charlotte Methuen is Professor of Church History at the University of Glasgow and an Anglican priest. After studying theology in Edinburgh, Heidelberg, and Tübingen, she held posts in theology at the universities of Oxford, Bochum, and Hamburg before starting to teach in Glasgow. Charlotte has long been active in ecumenical relations and in faith and order issues. She is currently a member of both the Anglican Lutheran International Commission and the Anglican Old Catholic International Coordinating Council. She has served on the Standing Commission on Unity, Faith and Order of the Anglican Communion, the Church of England's Faith and Order Commission, and the Meissen Commission, which oversees relations between the Church of England and the German Protestant Church. She serves as assistant priest in a parish of the Scottish Episcopal Church and also in an Old Catholic parish in Germany. Charlotte, what are the most important characteristics of visible unity from an Anglican perspective?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to be here and to make a slightly different contribution from the message contribution. So I've been reflecting that in some ways the story of Anglicanism over the past decades has often been seen as a story of disunity. As we've wrestled with discussions around women's ordination, around same-sex relationships. And in many ways, what we're doing there is wrestling with a much deeper question around the shift from a structure in which bishops and often clergy were appointed in a Western church and sent out into colonial dioceses, and moving into a system where local churches are training their own clergy, are producing their own bishops. So the story of Anglican struggles with unity is very much a story of what it means to be a church, to be a communion with a legacy of colonial expansion. And I think we've been asking really important questions over the last 20, 30, or even 100 years about what structures in the Anglican Communion support and articulate our Anglican unity, and we're still very much wrestling with those questions. We have in the Lambeth Quadrilateral a statement that says what we need for unity is an understanding that we share our scriptures, that we share the Nicene and Apostles' Creed, that we share the sacraments of baptism and communion, and that we share the historic episcopate. And it's that has often been the basis for our thinking about our ecumenical unity. Within Anglicanism, the Church of England itself emerged as a church which was not clearly denominationally and doctrinally defined. We have the 39 Articles in the Church of England, but we've never, they were never imposed or accepted in the way, for instance, that the Augsburg Confession became a fundamental statement of faith. In the Anglican context, it was much more for many centuries. It was our worship that held us together. It was the Book of Common Prayer and our shared patterns of worship. But as Anglicans have experienced the variety of worship and moved in different directions with that, even our shared patterns of worship have sometimes become more difficult to articulate. So we, as Anglicans, continue to struggle with our questions of what it is that holds us together. But I think we are trying. What I find really inspiring in the communion is the way that, despite the differences, people do continue to work together. We're struggling again at the moment with, after the appointment or the nomination of Sarah Mullally as Archbishop of Canterbury, and with a new move to say no, we need to, from GAFCON to say no, we need to split. But actually, despite all that, the sense that we do somehow belong together continues to shape Anglican discussions. So there's a generosity in that which I want to come back to. I think locally, in the British context at least, and I speak here, I think, for England and Scotland and Wales, local ecumenism and local understandings of unity are very deeply rooted now in congregational context. I, as a child, attended the Methodist Sunday school in our village because we had a Methodist church and an Anglican church, and the Anglican church had no Sunday school. So we were sent to the Methodist Sunday school. In my own career, like others on the panel, I have taught many people from other denominations. I've taught in German faculties, including future ministers for Lutheran, Reformed and United churches. I've taught Scottish Presbyterians and continue to. I teach Old Catholic candidates, and I've even taught the odd Anglican in my career, though my shortest period of my career was my period teaching Anglicans. I trained myself alongside Scottish Presbyterians in Edinburgh, alongside Congregationalists, as they then were. They're now part of the United Reformed Church, and alongside Roman Catholics who were also studying in the same faculty. And as Johannes has already said, I myself serve as an Old Catholic priest in an Old Catholic parish as an Anglican priest on the basis of the 1931 Bonn Agreement. And I think that experience for me underlines the importance of continuing to work on these structural questions. Increasingly, I think, on the ground, lay people are saying, well, we can worship together, do worship together, and particularly amongst Protestants, there's often mutual Eucharistic sharing, but we still need structures that help us to organize if we want to work together more formally on a ministerial level, how we do that. And I was privileged recently to work on an agreement between the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Bavaria and the Episcopal Church of the USA, which has led to full communion, and was at the signing of that in June. And I continue to be very committed to actually working on agreements that help us to articulate the kind of the mechanics, if you like, of our lived unity. So I just go back a page here. I think one of my own reflections is that sometimes in my ecumenical work with Lutherans and Old Catholics or on the Faith and Order Commission, sometimes you find real synergies with people of other churches and real struggles with people of your own church. At least for me, that's been a situation. Some of the hardest experiences I've had have been of fellow Anglicans saying, well, you're not really a Christian or you're not really ordained. And I've had much less of that experience in my ecumenical journey. But I would want to come back to the experience of unity as generosity. I think unity is when we come together, when we share with each other, when we learn from each other. I think we experience a generosity of sharing our gifts with each other, sharing the gifts that God has given us with each other. And that seems to me to link very much into what the Karlsruhe Unity Statement, which I also worked on, was talking about the unity through the ecumenism of the heart, the way in which we share together because we recognize the person of Christ in each other. And it's that, it seems to me, that is fundamental to our experience of unity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for reminding us about Anglican perspectives on unity, the four pillars, including the historical episcopate, also the agreements on full communion with the Old Catholics, with Lutherans, with some Lutherans, between Lutherans, Bavaria, Episcopal Church, quite recently you mentioned, and the experience of unity as generosity that might lead us into our conversation now, and I'm quite proud that we stick to the time. All speakers followed my instructions so that we are finished with your statements after less than 1 hour and still have really half an hour to talk with each other here. And my proposal for the second round of our conversation is to follow the method of receptive ecumenism. And that means to reflect on what you have learned from the other panelists. And that also picks up what Charlotte just said about the generosity. So from your perspective, what are the strengths of the others? And what do you appreciate most having heard their presentations? And what do you think is missing in your own denomination for making unity visible? I think as Suki had the longest time to listen to the others, she is allowed to start now again to answer this question. What are the strengths of the other? What do you appreciate?
Thank you, fellow panelists, for sharing such rich perspectives and really different ones, grounded in different contexts. I think it's a very diverse picture that we are hearing here from how we understand unity or how we approach and how we see where this unity is directing us towards. If I may, I would like to ask a follow-up question about and learn more from Mano regarding how the church could be a pioneer and a catalyst for reconciliation in the midst of ethnic conflicts or polarizations, where too often church members, Christians ourselves, are also entrenched in those ethnic and national belongings. Where do we begin? And in your experience, how did the church or church members could become some sort of messenger, catalyst for that process of reconciliation?
Thank you very much. We go on with Athanasius. What do you appreciate most hearing the presentation of the others? What are the strengths of them from your perspective?
Thank you all participants on this panel. I mostly liked Teddy's vision for shared discipleship, and what he mentioned about actions towards justice and practical ecumenism, not only institutional ecumenism. And I think is that what I sometimes miss in my own tradition, namely a broader willingness to engage ecumenically, not only on the level of theological reflection, but to be engaged in acts of love and humility for one another, and also in projects and initiatives that will serve people in need in the environment. And I always stress that Jesus firstly washed the feet of all disciples, and after that he gave them the commandment to love and reflected on the oneness of God and the disciples. This is my commentary on your.
Okay, thank you. We continue with Mano. What did you learn from the others?
I like the emphasis on ethics that my sister mentioned. I think that is one of the weaknesses that the younger generation picks up on if the church doesn't walk the talk. And I think some of the weaknesses in my culture is that we still have a lot of division, a lot of hierarchy, a lot of leadership styles which are more cultural than biblical. And younger people especially pick up on those things. And so I think ethics is a very important aspect of unity, that we need to be united around values, which I think my sister picked up on. And also the idea that we have to, connected to that, the colonial aspects. I wouldn't say it's only colonial aspects, but the aspect of domination within the church, which is perpetuated by our own culture and which is not addressed. And which is why I said sometimes the unity is surface, but it's not going deep enough. And especially to reach the next generation, I think it's important to build on these two things. Thank you.
Thank you. Please give this micro back to the others so that they have here a micro as well. Teddy, concerning the concept of receptive ecumenism, what do you appreciate from having heard the others?
I really found very helpful the reflections that Suki offered on totalizing views of unity. I think that is something that got me to think when we think the oikumene and how much are we still wanting to totalize views of unity. And as an educator, I was very also glad to listen to Mano talk about the hidden curriculum, because I think we also need to be intentional about ecumenical formation as something that is very important in this journey. And also appreciated the reflection on an ecumenism of the heart, and how that goes hand in hand also with hospitality.
Thank you. Mentioning the importance of ecumenical formation gives me the opportunity once again to welcome the Getty students amongst us. Thank you that you share our conference with us. It's an enrichment for all of us. Last but not least, Charlotte, from your perspective, what are perspectives, points of enrichment you learned from the others?
I found really helpful your idea of unity as discipline, that unity is a discipline to be practiced. I think that that's a helpful way of thinking about the relationship between unity as gift and unity as something that we realize. And in that sense, I'm going to take that away and ponder the discipline of unity. And I think that related to several of you talked about the multilinguality, the way that as we learn to speak different languages, we learn to speak different theological languages, and that unity is very much rooted in that being able to mediate between and interpret between different theological languages. So the multilinguality, the theological multilinguality, I think, of what we're doing when we come together in this kind of environment, when we meet together and pray together with people of other confessions. I think that is absolutely spot on. It's not about losing your identity, but recognizing. I mean, I'm dual national. I'm German and British. I think there's some really interesting reflections. I think many people here have lived in more than one country, and that experience of moving between cultures as we move is what we're doing when we move between denominations. And I think that really came out of all the presentations.
Thank you very much. After starting talking about what we appreciate most with the others, so picking up the positive points, we should address also what makes things complicated, maybe. So the third question from my point of view would be, what are, from your point of view, significant barriers for visible interdenominational unity in your cultural context, and how would we be able to overcome these barriers? And I propose that we start now the other way around. So Charlotte, you are now the first, and we will end with you, Chi. Barriers for unity and how to overcome them.
Yeah, in some ways, I think I've already reflected on the way that in my own Anglican context, I think we often experience more barriers at the moment within the denomination than actually in our conversations with others. And how we overcome, or how we reach out to each other across the divides around questions of ethics, questions of how we understand gender and how our churches have taught us to understand gender. I think those are massive differences within us, within my own communion, but I think those are also big questions that we struggle with as we come together and meet in this kind of context. In my own institutional context, in thinking about how do we move forward with other denominations, the primary question in our conversations with Protestant churches is often around the historic episcopate. Anglicans say we can share the Eucharist with people, we don't necessarily recognize their ministries entirely. I realize that for Catholics and Orthodox, that's a very bizarre thing to do, but that's the way we have developed our Anglican understandings of ecumenism. And that in order to come to agreement around recognition of ministries, we need to come to an agreement about the episcopacy of the church, the episcopacy of the church. And so that in churches which have moved away from having an episcopate, a historic episcopate, that is a massive barrier. And on other levels, in terms of relationships with the Roman Catholic Church, for instance, the recognition or the lack of recognition of Anglican orders is a big issue. I think on the ground, that's much less complicated. We've just signed a really exciting agreement in Scotland of friendship between the Scottish Episcopal Church and the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland, the Roman Catholic Bishops' Conference in Scotland. But to commit to work more closely together, but we're very aware that we're doing that in the context of a situation in which our orders are not actually recognized.
Thank you, Charlotte. Teddy, how to overcome the barriers towards unity? What's your perspective?
Thank you. I highlighted a few barriers already. I'll just lift three. The one is how to engage the state, I think is one issue that can also emerge and pose a challenge to ecumenical unity. And here I speak from the Zambian context in which churches find unity in addressing public issues, but that at the same time, that engagement could also lead to polarization when those in power divide and rule or privilege certain voices. That can be a challenge, but may also be a challenge in terms of the competition for voice. But also the lingering question of the legacies of the past. From the context where I live in South Africa, that is not an aspect you can gloss over in thinking about lived, visible unity. And again, the metaphor of a journey for me becomes very helpful as one way of addressing this and thinking about our shared humanity, but also the love that God invites us to embrace and to share.
Thank you very much. We hand over to Mano. So what are, from your point of view, barriers for unity and how could we overcome them?
I think there are still barriers which are to do with ethnicity and with gender. So, for example, the church that I worship in, there are 3 separate congregations divided by language. And although in my particular context, we are united, I might say, but those are the kinds of issues that lead to disunity in churches, the lack of resources, competition, or for example, even when women are ordained, women rarely rise to higher ranks in the church, issues of domestic abuse. So there are still issues like that which are not addressed, which lead to disunity. There is also a rise in what I might say false teaching, where strangely enough those churches would probably subscribe to the Nicene Creed, but they are preaching a very different kind of Jesus and attracting many people. And they tend to be separationist and they tend to warn their members against joining other churches. So that's another barrier. There is also, which has been around for a little while, a kind of consumerism among believers, so people who move from church to church and do not commit to any local church, and therefore there's a very fluid attitude to belonging. There's also a certain, because we are seen sometimes as a threat to Buddhism when we proselytize. So churches who are engaged in evangelism and church planting are labeled. They're labeled fundamentalists, they're labeled imperialists. And at times like that, some churches will distance themselves from others to avoid persecution. So that's also something that causes division. And I feel there is a challenge with reaching the next generation. So the next generation, Gen Z, Alpha, they have a mistrust of organizations, they have a mistrust of leadership, and a lot of them don't really understand what church is. I mean, a lot of older people don't either, but the importance of church. Why do we need church? So I think reaching them, explaining to them, modeling for them will mean that we we can foster intergenerational unity.
Thank you very much. From an Orthodox perspective, what are barriers for visible unity and how to overcome them?
Thank you for asking me this crucial question. From my point of view, the first barrier has to do with our failure to live up to our ideals. So we proclaim love, we proclaim unity, but unity presupposes sacrifice and humility, especially in our Orthodox tradition. Nowadays, we are in front of the great issue of nationalism or ethnophilitism. And it is a great barrier first for the Orthodox to have a common voice regarding ecumenism. And beside, always we have conservative voices and fundamentalists, but it is a problem that occurs in almost all traditions. For me, it is important to overcome also the persistent cliches and misunderstandings. I often have to do in the academia with people who have an idea of Orthodoxy as something exotic, esoteric, mystical, and they are afraid of us. And therefore, I always find there is a great need for a deeper education, for a deeper knowledge of the other traditions. And I think that is the first thing we shall undertake. So, search for the truth, education, and living the ideals that we proclaim, love and humility.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, the Chinese context. What are barriers from your perspective and how to overcome them?
I think it goes back to the question about the first philosophy of unity here. If we stick to the paradigm of ontology instead of ethics in terms of institutional visible unity, in the long history of different union attempts among the churches, usually the failure or the biggest barrier to visible unity understood as such are material reasons. Such as the church properties, how do we deal with that when we come together as a church? Such as the payment scale of the salary for different clergy in different traditions, how does that work? But if we move, or at least see that as a corrective, complementary collective with the ethical self-understanding of unity, then we have a very different picture to see what are the barriers, or at least towards where we are moving and trying to foster that kind of unity. I want to give some examples of how the ethical self-understanding of unity are made in an everyday life situation. I'm privileged to steer some of the ecumenical work at the Hong Kong Christian Council. Like many other theological exchanges, we also bring theologians together to discuss the very things that keep us apart institutionally, the nature of baptism, the meaning of the Eucharist. But there is this critical difference that we state our goal as not to arrive at a doctrinal agreement. We are not trying to solve a problem that divides us. Instead, our aim is ethical in terms of active listening, deepening our mutual understanding of one another, not to debate which is better or how to come to a common ground, but to listen and for once to inhabit for a moment the sacramental world of the other tradition, to understand its integrity in its own terms without demanding that it conforms to ours or some others. And which, in that sense, it's not a prelude to unity. It is a form of unity in our understanding and experience. Another most, I would say, radical form of this ethical unity happens when we are pushed beyond our ecumenical circles. There are quite a number, if not the majority, traditions in Hong Kong who are staunchly fundamentalist, who will not want anything to do with us in the ecumenical circle. And yet, when we gather to confront the dire challenges of our city, they are eagerly at the table with us. When we sit together to ponder the well-being of the exhausted caretakers, or to face the heartbreaking crisis of youth suicide, the labels of ecumenical or fundamentalists easily and naturally dissolve. What are the kind of unity we're envisioning? When the face of the suffering neighbor presents an ethical demand that precedes our theological agreements or disagreements, it is in that shared space of vulnerability and service that we find ourselves in a profound, unscripted koinonia, a unity that we do not construct with a GPS or a plan, a way of navigating to the Garden of Eden, an imagined past, a metaphysical reality of oneness, but one that is commanded of us, not initiated by us, but commanded of us by the cry of the suffering world. It is here that we discover that we are already one, not in an institutional sense, but in an ethical and very theological sense, I would argue. So how do we understand unity? That also shapes how we understand the barrier to unity. Can we also take this ethical self-understanding into the very theological heart so that we can reshape what we are doing here as a forward movement, not traversing back to the imagined past, but a forward movement into a future where the irreducible other, be it theological, political, or sexual, is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be held in an unscripted koinonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sukshi. I would like to take this up, the idea of the forward movement, in my concluding question to all the 5 panelists. From my point of view, visible unity is not a goal in a distant future, at the end of the path towards Christian unity, but something that arises while walking together and continues to grow with every step on our ecumenical journey. I would therefore like to conclude by asking what, in your context and from your perspective, should be the first step towards making Christian unity more visible and tangible. So asking not what are the perspectives in the distant future, but what would be the first step in your context? You have 2 minutes to answer to this question from your point of view, and we start again now with Sukhi.
Thank you, Johannes. I would echo Teddy and many other colleagues in this conference in stating that how do we imagine or how do we understand? There really requires and calls from us a very important challenge or the cross of us today to take up the colonial gaze, that how we examine our own understandings and imaginations. What does it mean to be one? If we only set our eyes on the kind of institutional doctrinal agreement or creedal consensus, there I say, we may end up seeing our own efforts, every step and failure, not every step a movement or a progress. So I would say the first step should we examine how do we understand the sense of unity and what does that mean for the world instead just what does that mean for us as church. Thank you.
Thank you. Your perspective, first step towards visible unity.
Thank you. For me, the first step is to cultivate personal relationships. Also, actively reaching out to others, visiting them, listening to them, and caring for them. But we all know that changes often meet strong resistance. Therefore, we need better education, building networks of research at the university, and also to act together as Christians. First to act, and after that to reflect on unity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We continue with Mano. What you would like to propose as a first step on the path towards visible unity?
I think in some ways being a minority can be an advantage because there are certain pitfalls we do not fall into. But I think one of the, like my brother said, I was going to say, building relationships is, I would say, one of the most important, because there is so much suspicion, there's so much stereotyping, so much misunderstanding of what happens in different churches and what people believe. And so forums where people can meet each other, I think it's happening a lot among the younger generation. But I think, yes, building relationships and dispelling the myths and suspicion. I also feel that an emphasis on the kingdom of God is a good corrective to people sometimes who are building their own kingdom, thinking their own denomination is the kingdom, but concentrating on Jesus's message about the kingdom, which incorporates a lifestyle, but also the trust and hope that He is building His kingdom and we are not. And so it takes a little bit of the pressure off us, because He has said that He will build His church and the gates of hell will not prevail against them. So hope and trust and love for one another, I would say. Yes.
Thank you, Mano. Teddy, from the African perspective, please forward the micro. From the African perspective, what would you propose as a first step?
Thank you. In South Africa, there is a word I've come to love, Sawubona, I see you. And I think that's an important place to start from, that we see one another and that we can listen to our stories and not the narrative. I think we miss the opportunity to listen to the story because we hear a narrative and not the story. And that then invites us on the pilgrimage in which we bring our different stories to share in the story of the God of life.
Thank you very much. Charlotte, your proposal.
Yes, thank you. I think friendship, building friendship, and friendship characterized by what we've already heard, what I might call a generous and a warm curiosity about each other and hospitality to each other. It seems to me that that's an absolutely fundamental first step. And I'm really struck by, I'm saying that and thinking that the ecumenical movement itself was inspired by the mission movement, but also by the international movement for friendship between the churches, which was established 120 years ago. And that message of friendship, I think, is really important. But I think the other thing for me is the principle that the Faith and Order Conference at Lund articulated, doing as much together as we can. So doing together what we can and really allowing that to deepen our relationships and to help us to then engage with the theological questions that I still do think do need to be addressed. So friendship and doing together what we can.
Thank you very much. It's interesting. Almost all panelists started to propose, well, we should build relationships, build friendship as a first step. This will give us an opportunity to once again, the WCC as organizer and the Coptic Orthodox Church as a host, to giving us the opportunity to building relationships and friendships here at this World Conference. In conclusion, I would like to thank all our 5 panelists for their committed contributions and their powerful plea for truly living visible unity. We have learned how important it is to get personally engaged for unity, making unity visible. That means not only striving for unity in a somehow distant future, but living unity in the present, here and now. Thank you again for your contributions. And I hand over to Andre for some organizational announcements.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much to all of our panelists for deep reflection and conversation. As you know, we are scheduled for lunch break, but before we go for lunch, just a couple of announcements. First, as agreed today when we discussed our World Conference message, we will not have the meeting in the sections. So the first meeting after the lunch at 2:30 is scheduled to take place here, and we will have a plenary meeting, a hearing session on the World Conference message starting at 2:30. And this is a reminder to all of you who are delegates and registered as delegates and have received consensus cards, please bring them for this session. We will need you to use them. So please bring consensus cards. You have received a hard copy of the evaluation form from the Logos Papal Center, a survey on your chair. Please fill it in and leave it on your chair. Hopefully you have done that already. If you have not, please do it as soon as possible. Also, during lunch break, you will receive a survey from our side, from the WCC Faith and Order side, with a survey link. Please take some time to fill it in digitally, online, to give us your feedback on how this event went for you. Again, a reminder, we have a number, and it's not a small number of devices that have been taken out of the hall. Please bring them back. Look into your pockets, into your conference bags, into your backpacks, and bring them back. As you use them, leave them in the hall before you leave. And I believe that's it. I wish you a enjoyable lunch, and see you after break at 2:30, all here in the plenary hall. Thank you.